Hey, what's up everybody? I'd like to welcome you to another audio programming tutorial for beginners. And today what we're going to talk about is this term called envelope. Now, some of you might be asking what an envelope is. An envelope is basically something that we can use to modify the way that a sound behaves linearly over time. Okay, and in this tutorial, what I'm going to show you is how we can use an envelope to basically control the volume of our sound over time. So if you recall from our last tutorial, basically we created a sine oscillator along with a few modifications where we added some frequency modulation, ring modulation, amplitude modulation features to it. And then we had a way that we could turn the sound on and off. But all we could really do was turn the sound on and off. We didn't really have any sort of control over the sound, where if we wanted to, let's say, hook our oscillator up to a keyboard, we didn't have any way to control the way that sound behaves, where it starts and where it stops. And that's what we can use an envelope for. Okay, so at the moment, just to give you a demonstration, I have a synthesizer open here in Ableton called Serum. Okay, some of you might be familiar with it, and if you're not familiar with it, don't worry about all these dials and knobs and everything. I just want you to concentrate here on this part here where you see this kind of trapezoid shaped figure moving across. Okay, and this is what an envelope actually is. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to control the behavior of the sound, the way that the sound comes in, and then the way that we may that the sound may continue on after we release the key if we choose. Okay, and we can use that to kind of sculpt our sound a little bit further. So I'm just going to give you a demonstration. So if I just hit the key now, you can hear that as soon as I press the key, then the sound comes in, and as soon as I release it, the sound stops. Okay, and that's kind of showing what the sound is doing there with this square shaped figure. Okay, it's saying as soon as the sound comes in, we're coming to full volume, and as soon as I release the key, then the sound stops. Okay, but what if I take this attack dial here, I just move it forward just a little bit. Okay, let's say that we move it to 1 second. Okay. Okay, you can hear that the sound just kind of comes in a bit slow. Okay, kind of on a ramp, just like what we see here with this picture. Okay, and that's what attack does. It determines how fast the sound actually attacks. Okay, for now we're not going to worry about this hold stage. Most ADSRs, I say ADSR. ADSR stands for attack, decay, sustain, release. Okay, most of them don't worry about this hold feature, so we're just not going to worry about that for now. We're going to skip straight to the decay. Now, decay can be kind of a little bit tough to explain, because decay and sustain kind of work together a little bit to kind of give you the shape of your sound. Okay, because if I move this decay on its own, let's put this attack back at 0, and then if I move the decay up and down, you can hear that it's not really doing anything to the sound. Okay, and that's because decay determines how long that it stays in what we would call its kind of peak state. Okay, so if I just move the attack up a little bit here, okay, then if I move the decay down, now you can see that that's controlling how that sound is going to behave. Okay, it's going to control how long that the sound is going to stay at full volume. Okay, now it works. What happens with sustain is sustain basically says that when the sustain is at full, it basically means that as long as I keep the key held down, it's going to stay at full volume. Okay, but if I move the sustain down, you can see that it changes how long it's going to be in that peak state. Okay, and then that controls how we can shape our sound. Okay, so it goes to that peak state, the decay state, and then it drops off. Okay, the final stage we have here is release, and that's what happens when we release the key. Okay, just exactly what it says. Okay, so if I just move this up, and I'm moving it to 1.2 to a little bit over a second, that means that when I hit the release, that it should take about a second for the sound to taper off. Okay, and you can hear that. Okay, and you can use these 4 controls to really shape the sound. Like, let's say that I just wanted a really short sound. What I could do is I could turn the sustain all the way down, and then I can use the decay to determine how quick or how slow I want that sound to be. So if I want it really quick, I can make it as short as I'd like to make it. Okay, or I can make it quite long. Or if I want it to have a little bit to not come to a complete silence, but have a little bit of a taper off, then you can do that. So this is a way that we can shape our sound to get a sound that's a little bit more musical, and something that we can use a little bit more effectively when we're trying to play these sounds as an instrument. So I'm going to go ahead and exit out of Ableton. And what we're going to do is we're going to implement this in our oscillator. Okay, and the thing that I'd like you to concentrate on is, hold on, I'm just trying to find my project here. The thing that I would like you to concentrate on is just the way that I'm implementing this, because the implementation of this is actually quite easy, but it's really just making a discussion as far as what it's actually doing to the sound itself, and just really getting an awareness of, okay, what is that doing to control the sound. So just to go over our oscillator briefly again, I've gone in here and I've made a couple kind of tweaks and improvements on it, just to make sure that when it loads in its proper state, which can be an issue with Macs sometimes. Okay, and I'll put this patch up for download for you to check out and pull apart and mingle with. Okay, but just to go over what we have here again, just so we're on the same page. So we have our main frequency oscillator, okay, that we call cycle. Cycle is just a sine wave, okay, and we have this. We can control the frequency of it with this number here. Okay, so at the moment it's oscillating at 440 hertz a second. Okay, then we have a couple of little features that we added. So if I turn the oscillator on, so remember this X is just a trigger, and I'm turning that sound on, and I can change the frequency of it. Okay, and then we can start adding these the frequency modulation, AM modulation, and ring modulation. I'm not going to do that at the moment, because I think it's more important to spend a moment to really emphasize to you what is going on with the sound and how this is actually being processed, in terms of numbers by the computer, because the more that you can be aware of the way that this is actually processing, the easier that it is to kind of start coming up with ideas as far as how you can take these sounds and start changing them around and modifying them. Okay, so let's just briefly go through that again. So this cycle at 440 hertz that we have here is really just a sine wave. Okay, I can't really draw a sine wave at the moment, but it's just a sine wave that's going from values of between +1 and -1, and it's doing that 440 times a second. Okay, now what that's doing is that's producing these values going between +1 and -1, and that's actually telling your speaker how it needs to move. Okay, between +1 and -1. +1 being the front of your speaker cone, like the speaker cone is moving forward, and -1 being how far back your speaker cone can move forward, can move backward. Okay, so the more that you can kind of get in tune with that idea, the easier that it'll be for you. And then when we talk about a trigger, Okay, we're just really taking those values, and we're modifying and we're multiplying them by a value of 0 or 1. Okay, so if we had these values that were that are coming from this sine wave, and then we multiply it by 0, well, we get 0 out, because 0 times anything is 0. Okay, and that's how we can control the sound turning on or off. Okay, if we multiply it by 1, then we get the same answer back, and then that's how we get it out to how we get those numbers out to our speakers. Okay, so now let's go ahead and discuss how we're going to implement this ADSR. Okay, now Max has it actually has an object. It's called ADSR. Okay, now one key, if you have Max and you're not quite sure, what you need to do, how to implement it, how to use it, I would advise that you, on Mac, it's Alt-click, or I'm not sure what it is on Windows. Okay, but if you do that, if you do Alt-click on a Mac, then it basically brings this up, which is your helper file. Okay, and then this will really give you a good clue as far as implementation. Now, this one has a couple different implementations. If you go up here, you normally have tabs here that refer to some different ways that you can kind of implement this ADSR object. Okay, so if we just take a look at this, we can see that we have a total of 5 kind of what would you call them, kind of nodes. I'll just call them nodes, that we can control. Okay, we have one that is just basically giving our signal a message of a 1 or a 0, just like we discussed with the trigger. Okay, then we have the attack, decay, sustain, and release controls, just like what we had on the serum synthesizer that we were just looking at. Okay, and this is in milliseconds. Okay, so 1,000 milliseconds equals 1 second. Now, sustain is a little bit different in that normally sustain is a value between 0 and 1. 1 meaning that when the decay is complete, your sustain just kind of stays at the full volume until you let the key go. And then anything less than that would make it behave differently. And then the release time is just the same as the other 3 in terms of it's in milliseconds. Okay, so that should make it fairly easy for us. Pardon me, to get to start getting some control over this sound. Okay, so what we can do is we can just take this object, we can just put it in, and then we can just take, if you're ever not sure about what node you need to kind of plug into, then you can just kind of float over it with your mouse, and it tells you, okay, trigger. Okay, so that's just our trigger here, and we can just take it and we can just do like so. Okay, and now we can take and we can plug that into our multiplication object. So we're multiplying. So all we're doing is the same thing. We're just taking and we're multiplying the value that's coming out of this ADSR, and we're multiplying it by the value that's coming out of this oscillator between -1 and +1. Okay, now the math is a little bit more complicated than that now, because we're going to have to give this ADSR some parameters to tell it how we want the sound to control. Okay, and then this ADSR is going to kind of do some math. It's going to do some math behind the scenes to kind of scale the sound up and down properly to do what we wanted to do. But I think this is a good enough explanation just so you can get an idea of what the ADSR what an ADSR envelope is all about. Okay, so what we can do is we can start putting some dials in here. Okay, I'm just going to use this. It's called live dial. So it's just a dial that will control our attack. Okay, so you can see I hover over that node there. It says attack, and boom, I put it right there. Okay. Now, if I want to change, at the moment we have the dial going from values of 0 to 127. Okay. Now I would prefer that this kind of go in milliseconds. So what I can do is I can actually press Command I. That'll bring me to my inspector, okay, where you can control some of the parameters. I'm just going to change the numbers here. I'm going to put it from 0 to 5,000. Okay. What that means is that I can have a maximum of a 5 second attack, where it would take up to 5 seconds to complete its attack phase. And I'm just going to change this to float. Okay, just like so. And boom, there's our attack. I can even like rename it if I want to. Okay, I'll just call this attack. Boom, there it is. Okay, now I can basically do that same, I could use those same parameters for the decay and release time. So I'm just going to copy that, just going to change the name of it to decay. Okay, then I'm just going to copy it again. Just Command D to copy or to duplicate. And then I'm just going to call this release. Okay, and now I can just plug these in. Plug in the release to the release node, decay where it needs to be. You can put these beside each other so we look nice and organized. Okay, so we just need sustain. Now sustain, as I said before, is just a value of between 0 and 1. Okay, so we could just change this to sustain. And where are the values? Okay, so I can make this go between 0 and 1. Okay, and then I will take this, I will put this here. Then we can just kind of line them up so they look nice and neat. Okay, now one issue that we're going to have is that when I play the sound, okay, we're not going to get any sound out because it doesn't really have any sort of decay or sustain or release kind of set to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it some initial parameters here. Okay, so I'm going to do this. There's probably I could do it here in the ADSR object actually. No, I'll do it in the in this I'll do them individually because then it can set the dials properly. Okay, so attack, we can just what we're doing now is we want to, when we first open up the project, we want the envelope to start in a place where it's immediately playable. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set some parameters where it's going to immediately load, where it can immediately be played, rather than us needing to tinker around with the dials here to get it to a playable setting. Okay, and I can use that doing what's called with an object called load mess. Okay, for this one, load mess just means that when the patch first loads, it immediately loads that value into the object that I have it attached to. Okay, so I'm just going to put this load mess 1. And that's just going to load. That's just going to load the attack with a value of 1 when it first loads. Okay, and I'm going to do something similar to these other ones. I'm just going to put this to, like, let's just say 1,000, or I'll put it to 500 milliseconds. Okay, this just gives some initial parameters that we can that where things will be playable from the get-go. Okay, I hope that's not confusing. If it's confusing and you can't and don't understand what I mean, just drop me a comment and I'll try to explain it better to you. Okay, and then load mess. We'll just set an initial release time of, let's say, 500 milliseconds. Okay. Now I'm obsessed with making my patches look neat. So great. Okay, so we have that now. And we should, I think we're good to go here. So okay, great. So you can hear when I hit the trigger there. When I turn it off, it takes about a half second to actually stop playing. So let's make sure that these parameters are actually set up properly. So I'm just going to turn this up to 2,000 milliseconds, which is 2 seconds, and then let's see what happens. I'm going to hit the sound, and then I'm going to turn it back off, and let's see what happens. Okay, and you can hear that it takes about 2 seconds to actually taper off. Okay, so let's see if our decay is working now. So I'm going to turn the sustain all the way down, and now we should have a little blip of that's a half a second long, and you can hear that we have that now. Okay, if I want an attack of, let's say, 2 seconds. Okay, now we have that as well. Okay, and now you can see I'm not gonna bother tinkering with the FM with the FM AM and ring modulation, but you can see, you know, once we start tinkering with these, I'll do it real quick. Why not? You can see that we start to get some interesting sounds, right? We can make it like a real slow type of thing, like it'll be like a UFO passing over, right? And we can start to get some really interesting sounds out of this now, you know, and now we can start thinking about things like, okay, what if we wanted to attach a filter, or what if we wanted to attach, you know, get some MIDI capability in here and be able to actually play notes with this sound, you know. So now we can start getting some ideas on how to kind of enhance this further. So that's where I'm going to end this tutorial for now. Next tutorial, we're either going to talk about getting MIDI capability, hooking up a controller or a keyboard, or maybe we'll talk about putting a filter in here. I'm leaning towards doing filtering. Okay, so that's where we're going to end things for now, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'll put this patch online for you to download, and I will see you next time.